Hello, welcome to Niners and Carols for socially distanced / curious people. I'm Robin Ince. I hosted the live show that we did over 25 hours on the 12th and 13th of December. In the next section, you are going to learn how to make the best custard imaginable, because that is science too. You're going to find out that from Michelle Dickinson. We also have one of my favourite scientists and science authors, and something of a polymath as well, who wrote a fantastic book about the brain, which came out earlier in 2020, Matthew Cobb. And also you will enjoy what I found to be a tremendously enlightening discussion about Indigenous science in Australia. I hope you enjoy the conversations. I'll see you later on. So now, ladies and gentlemen, let me hand you over to, and again, we have no idea. A lot of people, by the way, again, I was checking the reaction. They liked your clapping song. Very different to the original Goose Drank Wine version of the clapping song. But the people said I was tapping my feet, and some of them, it suggested they didn't know, I don't know what he's done to my body. The jazz is taking me over. So, Steve Pretty, create something more for us, please.
Since you're talking about chalk, I'm going to play this pre-chalk shell to start things off, and then we'll see how we go with this Odyssey over here.
Thank you very much, Steve Pretty. That was different to the other one. I think
What's different? I mean,
I didn't think it had the same sense that you were actually sending out a message to people to brainwash them so they commit some kind of assassination. The previous one had that kind of mixture of it, Krystal, Manchurian Candidate, I thought.
It's true. I mean, but if that's the case, then my mission has been successful because it slipped through unnoticed.
Oh, no, message. I don't know who I'm going to do. Oh, man. Now, I think we have time. Fortunately, my earpiece is gone because the battery has just run out, but I'm pretty certain that the next person we're going to have, again, someone who wrote a fantastic book I read very much, probably at the beginning of the year, or maybe even at the end of last year, which is basically the story of our brain, the history of our brain, what we know, and more importantly, the enormous amount that we don't know. And he's wonderful. He's a scientist based at Manchester University. He is the kind of polymath who at one point will write a book about the French resistance, and at the next point will write something about the nature of perhaps pathogenesis. And his name is Matthew Cobb, and here he is. So, welcome to your screens, Matthew Cobb.
Hello. I'm Matthew Cobb, and I'm going to tell you about how scientists are responding to some recent major breakthroughs in genetics. Genetic engineering now offers the possibility of manipulating genes to obtain characteristics in humans for disease resistance, and may yet permit us to gain time in our struggle against starvation, pollution, and waste. For the first time, there's now available a method which allows us to cross very large evolutionary barriers and to move genes between organisms which have never had genetic contact. The godlike power that such facilities endow on us could change the world in dramatic ways, both good and bad, and we've got to be ready to face the implications. We need to begin a dialogue which would educate the world's citizens. And above all, researchers ought to ask themselves if the experiment needs to be done, rather than if it ought to be done, or if it can be done. If it's dangerous, or wrong, or both, and if it doesn't need to be done, then don't do it. Now, you might be surprised to know that all these quotes were from the debates that took place at the beginning of our ability to precisely manipulate genes half a century ago. And although our technology has increased immeasurably in its power and precision, in particular through the recent development of precise and relatively simple CRISPR gene editing, which opens up the real possibility of scientific and medical breakthroughs, the promises and the threats essentially remain the same. In reality, no major change in the ethical landscape of genetics has taken place in the last 50 years. Insulin is now produced by genetically modified organisms, but the promises of synthetic biology remain largely unfulfilled. The rest of our products are produced in the usual way. The prospect of goats producing spider silk, which was much hyped a decade ago, has stalled. Genetically modified crops have been widely adopted and dominate some specific parts of agriculture, but they've neither transformed global food production nor have they threatened plant or animal life. Researchers are now using CRISPR to cure people of genetic diseases such as sickle cell disease, but the availability of this technology will surely depend upon finance rather than need. We can create new life forms with novel genomes and even create new unearthly forms of DNA, but these remain laboratory curiosities. And while we can specifically alter human genes that will be passed to the next generation by altering human embryos, this has been done once in China, and the perpetrator is now in prison, I don't think we need to fear that CRISPR Nazis will be marching down our streets in 20 or 30 years' time. Making a CRISPR baby involves arduous IVF procedures, and the vast majority of people are going to carry on making babies in the old way, which is simpler and generally a lot more pleasurable. But although I've been very reassuring about the risks associated with new genetic technology, perhaps there is an exception. There is perhaps a reason to be not only excited, but also very worried. Called a gene drive, this technology was first imagined in the 1960s, and since the advent of CRISPR, it's now a reality, in the laboratory at least. It can change whole ecosystems, for example, by eradicating disease-transmitting mosquitoes. Gene drives alarm the scientists who've developed them, because in their simplest form, they involve the release of new genes that will spread through a population in an exponential, uncontrolled fashion, like a bomb. And although scientists have come up with lots of clever ways to try and retain control over the new forms of genes in case the manipulation goes wrong, many people are concerned that in the work of the great scientist Dr. Ian Malcolm, life will find a way. Before a gene drive is released into the wild, we need to be sure that there'll be no significant ecological damage. Eradicating mosquitoes would get rid of malaria, but it might also have an effect on those species that, for example, eat mosquitoes, both as adults and as larvae, such as fish, birds, bats, or other insects. The ethical questions associated with the use of gene drives not only involve the potential dangers, they also raise the question of who should decide. While local communities should clearly have a veto, they shouldn't see mosquitoes released in their area if they don't want them, local democracy can't be the only answer. A decision taken on one part of the planet can have global implications because of international trade and the inadvertent transport of organisms from one side of the world to the other. The mosquito that transmits the Zika virus originally lived in Africa. In the 20th century, it was transported to the Americas, where both it and the virus altered, with devastating consequences, in particular on the human fetus. Now, the answer, it seems to me, is the creation of something like the Civil Aviation Authority, an international body that regulates the safe use of potentially devastating technology. And even more dangerous technology, nuclear power, is regulated by a similar body, the International Atomic Energy Authority. But both these structures were set up in the aftermath of World War II, when there was an appetite for international cooperation and organisation. I'm not sure that all appetite exists today. For example, the USA refuses to recognise the International Criminal Court. For international voluntary regulation of gene drives to be effective, governments around the world would have to sign up to what many would perceive as a restriction on their freedom to do research, including in developing countries. But this question's too important to be left to the scientists or to the biotech companies or even to local communities. The potential for good is enormous, but so too are the ecological risks. We need a global response to this technology, and that will require politicians, scientists, and the general public taking the matter as seriously as they currently take the question of human genetic manipulation. The fact that half a century after the development of genetic engineering, we still have the same fears doesn't mean that those fears are unjustified. Many people still feel a frisson of danger when they get on an aeroplane or when they go past a nuclear power station. And rightly so. But these technologies are relatively safe only because of international regulation. That's what we need to safely harness the amazing power of the gene drive to gain its potential benefits whilst avoiding potential ecological catastrophe.
Thank you very much to Matthew Cobb there. And after the jollying up there of Dave Copley, I feel now that we've gone back on another low, Steve. We've lost that. So that's why we're now going to move to some poetry. And I mentioned the Octavia Collective before, who we've done various things with in the past and who just write and create magnificent pieces. And so now you're going to see another member of the Octavia Collective who you haven't seen through the show so far. Please welcome to your screen, Sunayana Bhargava.
Hello, my name is Sunayana Bhargava, and I'll be reading a poem today that I wrote in collaboration with the Oxford Science and Ideas Festival called A Rubric for Heat, after the 4 laws of thermodynamics. Staring aimlessly out of a crowded train, I begin to wonder about the heat death of the universe. That runaway descent into disorder, like thread unspooling, or work eventually undone. What then could be more romantic than labor that fights the prophecy of its own extinction? Earlier I watched people assemble, like particles, charged against a death less inevitable than heat. To read the riot act to those who are already dispersed is perhaps yet another kind of entropy. After we said goodbye, I reimagined the entire city as a heat map, with train tracks molten, spilling under slick blue buildings, the residual warmth you left in my hands given away by an infrared eye. What if heat, like language, is not the firmness of ground, but the cracks that bloom under it? There is a way to rescue order. Rake in the wasteland of energy and bring it to rest. Absolute zero. The wilderness of space is too warm. The coldest place we have is here on Earth. I question laws that speak of bodies without first surviving in one, or stopping one from feeling illegal. On the cusp of equilibrium, I feel the incapacity of my hands as you slip through them, the gentle stasis of unrest under a darkening sky. An entire history of transfer lost, the moment two properties become equal.
Thank you very much, Sunayana. As I said before, go and find out more about the Octavia Collective. Now, as I've broken the boppet that I actually know kind of how it works, we've now got the other boppet test. For those of you who might have only joined us just now, I should tell you, by the way, what's coming up very soon. We've got Michelle Dickinson in a moment. She's going to be doing one of her demos. We'll have a quick chat with her. We've got Jimmy Barnes coming up. We've got Lawrence Long coming up. We've got Helen Chersky. We've got Chris Jackson. So now I'm going to try and do the boppet. So I think, let's see if... Right. No, I presume... Right, let's give this another go then. So I presume that wang sound is flick it. What do you reckon?
I don't know. What? Or is you've got to do it to
It
a
just
sound?
gives you a sound now.
Oh, God, that's even worse.
No, so that's not that one. So maybe that's the twist, right? No.
I think you're compromising the data points here by using a different mode.
Well, I can't... this doesn't have the mode.
Oh, I see.
This is why it's like the one that's broken was the one that would actually say, twist it, pull it, flick it. Whereas this just goes, woo, brr. You idiot, you failed. And you kind of go, this is Trump's America. This is all this is. This is everything that's said. So let's try this one more time, see if I can... Hang on. Shut up. What's oh, right, and one more go.
How are you supposed to know which sounds they are?
I don't know. I presume if you're a child, you know.
Part of the childhood code.
No, you're out.
Condescending.
Hang on. This is crazy. Right. Okay. Oh no. Right. Now we've got now we've moved to this one. Right. Okay. Here we go. Right. This one, I think it hasn't got any batteries in. Is the only problem with this one. Oh no. There we go. Right.
Is this the junior version?
Solo. Yeah. Right. 58,
58.
Right? Yeah, bop it. I just can't do the one that just goes, yeah, ooh, where?
That's like watching a Venus Williams rally.
Yeah, it really was. So that's
Very
58
similar.
now. I think I'm going to get better. You get ready for 100 now. Right, so I think now we're going. I'll double check by putting my earphone, which I actually put, because I'm taking this very seriously. Are we going to go to Michelle now? Right, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to, again, someone else. I talked about the tour we did of Australia and New Zealand. We went around New Zealand with her, and I've met her many times since then. And again, she's someone who's just fantastic at creating lots of different ideas to excite people about the ideas of scientific curiosity. And here she is. She's Michelle Dickinson. How are you?
Hello, how are you?
Oh, we're
so
doing
amazing
okay.
that you're still awake.
We're just about into the 19th hour of the show, so we're just getting towards the end of the 18th hour of the show. We're all surviving. The jazz is getting more experimental as time goes on. The use of the conch shell has now usurped all of the more technological moments. So it's very much a kind of Lord of the Flies thing. He now can't go towards the electronics. He can only use, and I'm the one with the glasses, so I will be murdered. What time are you there at the moment? Where are you?
We are almost 7 p.m. It's a hot, sticky summer's day here. And yeah, it's been a great day. It's been sunny all day. It's been the weekend. It's been good.
Before you show this demo, I just want to know what for you is, do you have a favourite of all of the demos? Maybe that moment that the first time you do it, you know, when you've worked on something for a while and you present it to an audience and you just get that fulfilling moment of going, not only did it work, but it imparted the information and it gave the excitement in the eyes of the audience that you'd really hoped for.
Look, I think there's lots of those moments. I always love it when you get the aha moment where somebody learns something for the first time that they can use in real life. I know when we were on stage together, when you were here in New Zealand, I taught people how to escape from a car if it was sinking and you were going into a lake. People have been messaging me and found that very reassuring, so that was always good to know. And you know me, I love to set things on fire, which we're going to do today. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, let's get straight on with that then. Let's see some fire. That's what Steve and me need. We need this metaphorical and both physical, real fire to just get us going.
All right, so I've got some real fire here. I'm just going to get a pan and put it on here. So look, my question, Robin, is do you like custard?
Oh yeah, I like custard.
Now, my question is, when you make custard at home, do you make real custard or do you make that powdery stuff that they call, you know, bird's custard out of a can?
I'm quite lazy on the custard. I'm not lazy on sauces generally. On savouries, I'm not lazy. I'll start from scratch. On sweets, suddenly the hunger and the need for some kind of suet usurps all of the cordon bleu element of me.
So if you read the back of your custard can, you'll find that there is no custard in powdered custard. It's actually just coloured corn flour and sugar. And so my plea to everybody is to make real custard. It's really easy and it's actually got custard in it. And most people come to me and say, I don't get custard, it goes lumpy, I don't know how it works. And so I'm going to show you the science of how custard works, ready for Christmas. We're going to do it very quickly, just as quick as if you made it out of a powder, but it's actually going to have real custard in it. So we're going to get started. I'm going to cook while I taught the science. We're going to start 575 millilitres of milk. You're going to put it into a pan. And you want that on a medium heat. Not boiling. The rule is not boiling. And while that's going in, we're going to take a vanilla pod. Now, you can use vanilla essence, but a vanilla pod is, well, it's just more tasty if you can get hold of these. You're going to cut it down the middle. You're going to get the beans out using the back of your knife, and it smells delicious. I know you're not here, and I know we're usually hanging out, but it does smell divine. Did you know that the name vanilla is Spanish for little pod? And it's actually, oh, it smells so good. It's actually, we're going to put all of the pod in there as well as the beans. It's the only flowering member of the orchid family. And sadly, the flower only flowers for 24 hours before it dies. So it has to be pollinated really, really quickly. Otherwise, it's game over. And it can only be pollinated by one type of bee. So a lot going on here with vanilla. We're going to put that in there. And we're just going to let it warm up until you get tiny weeny bubbles, but not boil. That's crucial there. While we're doing that, grab a bowl. You're going to take 4 egg yolks. You're going to take 1 tablespoon of caster sugar. sorry, 2 tablespoons of caster sugar, 1 tablespoon of corn flour, and you're going to whisk those together. Here is something that I have learned. So I live in New Zealand. I obviously came from the UK originally, and New Zealand is quite close to Australia. And I was like, well, they must be pretty similar. Hey, here is what I have learned the hard way. Did I bring them with me? You see any measuring spoons out here? Well, I've learned that 1 tablespoon in Australia is different to 1 tablespoon in New Zealand and the UK. So if you are doing this in the UK or New Zealand, 1 tablespoon. If you're doing this in Australia, not your type of tablespoon. A tablespoon in the UK is, I'm going to turn this heat off, it's bubbling now. Tablespoon in the UK is 15 millilitres. Tablespoon in New Zealand, 15. Tablespoon in Australia is 20, just to confuse everybody. So we're talking about 15 millilitres of volume. So mix these all in here. This is the important bit of the custard, the egg yolk. It's got proteins in there. The proteins are going to, at room temperature, be all coiled up. We're going to warm those proteins up in a second and they're going to unravel. The same goes for the starch in the corn flour. It's going to absorb a lot of the liquid that we've got going on here, and that's going to swell, and when they warm up, they're going to burst and create a gel. That is the secret. So if we take a look at my top-down camera, we'll see that we've got some nice small bubbles on here. Now this is going to be too hot to put in. If we put this into our egg mix right now, you'll get scrambled eggs. That's not what we want. So you're going to leave this for 10 minutes to cool, luckily Blue Peter style. Here is one I did earlier. I did it about 10 minutes ago, so I'm going to switch that one out. And you're just going to pour this in. Now if it's too hot, it's going to, this is where people go wrong. If it's too hot, it's going to cook your eggs. You don't want that. So this has been left for 10 minutes. I'm going to put it through a sieve so that our vanilla pods don't go into our custard. And then you're just going to mix. And so if you get scrambled eggs here, quit. You're never going to rescue it. Once you've denatured those proteins, it's too late. But you can hopefully see in the top-down camera, if we have a look at this. Oh, it's gone very blurry. Hold on a second. There we go. In my top-down camera, you can see a nice, yummy, and it smells delicious mixture. So we're going to put this back into the pan again on a medium heat. And we're going to let that warm up. Not boil, just warm on a medium heat and then down to a low heat. This is the trick. This is what you have to do. You have to keep stirring. This is where people go wrong. So it can be really lumpy if you don't keep stirring. So you have to love it a little bit. And the reason why it goes lumpy is if you don't keep stirring, that corn flour that you put in there sinks to the bottom, cooks faster than the rest of your mixture, and that's going to form these lumps. So you basically keep stirring and keep stirring. You want to get it to about 80 degrees C. So egg yolks usually denature at 60 degrees Celsius. But with the sugar, when they're mixed in, it actually slows that reaction down. So they can go to about 80 degrees Celsius. And as we put it on this heat, just a nice medium heat till we get a few bubbles and then cool it. We're going to put it on a low heat until it gets to the thickness that you like. And that is pretty much how you make custard. Really, really simple. Now here's the science. People say to me, oh, I hate the skin on custard. And so the skin on custard is really easy to prevent. So the reason why you get a skin on custard, and remember school dinners where custard always had that horrible thick skin on it? Well, the reason why it gets that thick skin on it is basically evaporation. When you put hot custard, which has moisture in and liquid, and especially water from the milk, when you put hot custard out, you'll see some steam coming off. That steam coming off is the liquid coming out and evaporating out of your custard. As it does that, the top layer is going to get dry. That is your skin. So if you don't want a skin to form on your custard, especially if you're making your custard first thing before you've got all your Christmas dinner ready and you're just going to reheat it later, the secret is really simple. All you need to do is cover the surface of your custard as soon as it's finished. Okay, this is thickening up nicely. I'm going to turn the heat off. You should be able to see, let's go to the top down, it's a nice thick consistency. And that is literally custard made probably in the same time as it took you to heat up your milk and put your custard powder in there. And so I'm going to put this on top of something that I think is very Christmassy. Here we go. We have a Christmas pudding and some fresh custard. How quick was that? I'm going to pour that on. Oh yeah. And that's how you make custard. Super easy, super tasty, fresh vanilla pod, milk, eggs, no powder, and it's going to be pretty hot. So if you're making custard beforehand, just a tip, put a little bit of cling film or something on top of the surface of your custard and it won't form a film. And so if you don't want a thick film on there or a crust or a whatever you want to call it, then that's that. If you want to try, I'm going to eat this if that's okay, because you know it's good to test your recipes. It's probably really hot. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. That's how you make real custard using science. And so for those of you who have custard, ooh, it's hot. Custard powder at home are thinking, well, now I know how to make real custard. What should I do? Well, there's an easy thing that you can do. We're going to come to it right at the end. But I've got an egg here. The reason why I think this is fascinating, and we have a new TV show coming out here in New Zealand called Kitchen Science. It comes out in December. It's because I'm fascinated about the science and the engineering of the foods that we eat. So I don't know if you know, but this is an egg, and an egg is really structurally amazing as a materials engineer. It's strong on the outside, but it's weak enough that a baby chick can peck its way out and break it open. Also, they have about 17,000 microscopic holes in an egg. Those holes can keep pathogens out, but are enough for the chick to be able to breathe on the inside, which is kind of cool. If you've ever made poached eggs before, you will know that you should use as fresh as egg as possible for poached eggs. The older your egg goes, the less likely they are to poach. And that's because when a chicken lays an egg, it basically puts carbon dioxide into the egg white. There are two types of egg white. There's a thin type and a thick type. A fresh egg has lots of thick type of egg white, which is great for poached eggs. And it has a pH of about 7.8. As time goes on, this carbon dioxide comes out of solution, out of these pores, and there's less carbon dioxide in here. Your egg white pH actually goes from about 7.8 to up to 9. And in doing that, it converts the thick to the thin. Thin egg whites don't make a don't make a poached egg very well. So lots of technical stuff in eggs. Try and use as fresh as possible. And before we go, Robin, because I know we don't have much time, if you have custard powder at home and you're like, well, now I know how to make real custard, what should I do with it? I've got a little trick for you, something you can do with it. Take your custard powder, put it into a tube. Very, very simple. I'm going to put some safety glasses on. This is one of my favorite experiments. So here's my safety glasses. I'm going to put my flame on here. And so custard powder is actually only basically tiny particles of corn flour, like we said. And corn flour is a glucose molecule, it's a sugar molecule. Now, when it's packed together, it's perfectly fine. But when it's individual tiny particles and it reacts with the oxygen and a flame, it's highly flammable. So for those of you who've got lots of custard powder left at home, want to do something, I advise that you would do this outside because it can be a little bit messy. But basically, here is the final experiment for today. I'm just going to stand over here. I'm going to put my flame on. All you have to do is blow your custard powder into the flame, and this hopefully will make your Christmas very fun. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. And that's how you make a fireball out of custard while eating real custard made from actual egg yolks, which is super yummy. And that's my science for Christmas, Robin.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was wonderful. That is. Now, I'm trying to remember. I'm going to ask Steve this. I'm beginning to lose track of what happened during today's show, now that we're nearly on the 19th hour. Was it today that someone had some orange peel and squeezed it near a candle to see the flames that were created?
I definitely have seen that, so that's the good news.
Yeah, probably then. This is the only time we've spent together.
It is.
We've entirely lost track now of...
Was that in the sound check, or was that... No, that was
Someone tell us if you're watching it and you've been watching for the same time that we've been up. This is what we were saying, Michelle. This is a very interesting. I think we almost need a sugar rush now. I think anyway. So we are now going to move on to the next guest, and it is such a weird. I've always found this fascinating, but this one, as we were saying before, this strange thing of remaining awake, but also having to have the social brain constantly active, which is every single time that I go, hey, and it's just again. I think when I was younger, the hey went on for longer, and now the comes in a lot quicker.
Well, the social thing, as you say, is quite different because I can sort of, because I'm working on this track, and if I'm at home in my studio and I need to pull an all-nighter as I occasionally do, or something like that, then I can sort of just get my head down, and I go into you go into a sort of almost semi-trance-like state where you're just focused on the screen, which probably is terribly unhealthy, I'm sure, but you kind of focused on a task at hand, and whereas if you're having to be sociable, this is a very different part of your brain, as we were talking about earlier, right? So because you're having to switch constantly between those different parts of your brain rather than just focusing on one task, I think. And I guess because the other people that do lots of 24-hour things, I think people like coders, right? I think they do like big coding marathons and stuff. But that's quite different, I guess, because you're sort of, on a mission.
And also, this is my only day of being gregarious all year, really, because of what's been going on. So welcome, everyone who's perhaps some of you have just got up, some of you are still staying with us throughout the night with insomnia. And thank you very much, Andy Pickering. You're quite right. It was Jamie Gallagher all those years ago. Jamie Gallagher was showing what to do with orange peel. And I think my diet has not been good enough today as well. I've had one banana, a mug of pasta from some kind of microwave mug pasta thing,
so
and a crisp sandwich, cheese and onion. I don't feel they were the right things to do.
I'm very much on the same page on that.
Yeah, we better start doing something healthy and fast, right? We better make our own custard. So a reminder again for anyone who's just joined us about the charities today. I really would, at the very least, I hope we can get to 20 grand because we're not that far off 20 grand. I would like to thank, there are a few people who, I'd always say this as well, of course, I do realise that some of you watching this are not in the position to donate anything, and there is no guilt attached to that whatsoever. I hope you're having a good time. I hope you're enjoying the things you're seeing. For those of you who are perhaps in a position, it would be what we're really hoping to get is to 30 grand. Thank you very much for, I think we've had 30 or 40 people who've donated £100, which is very, very nice of you. Thank you for that. And reminder that it's the charities include Mind, the mental health charity, Turn to Us, which is to help people in difficult financial situations, also Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, and also the King's Place, their musical charity as well. Those are the charities that are benefiting later on, not that far away. In fact, we have Lawrence Lung, we have Jimmy Barnes. I had a conversation with Jimmy Barnes about both his new book, and also we hear from Jimmy Barnes is something off his new album as well. Helen Chersky's going to be going through some of the pictures that you've sent. I'm not sure if there's still time to send pictures, but please do. I've also, I'm trying to think, we've got geology coming up, we've got physics coming up, we've still got astronomy coming up. So any questions on those, you just tweet us there with hashtag 9lessons24, and we'll see how many more questions. I will give you a further rundown of what we've got coming up.
Just while you're finding that, just another shout out for this Christmas song. It's coming on really nicely. We could use a couple more voices if there's anyone who wants to lend their voice, whose neighbours will be understanding. Just singing a scale or even shouting Christmas, maybe.
Yeah, that would be lovely. So do send those in as well. What's the email again?
It's 9lessons@cosmicshambles.com.
9lessons@cosmicshambles.com. That's where you can get.
You can also get them off Twitter and stuff. I think.
Just send a little file or whatever with you. I should mention we've got Tamsin Edwards as well, who's fantastic on climate change. So if you've got questions about climate change, also how can I forget? We've got Helen Sharman and Samantha Cristoforetti as well, who are going to be talking together about their life in space and what they're stuff for them. And again, Samantha actually is someone. Well, both of them fantastic people to ask about different things in climate change, and Samantha when she was actually up on the ISS as well, doing a lot of work. So we are now officially into the 19th hour. And we are going back now to the southern hemisphere. As I said, we're one continent away, still Antarctica to do, but we are very easily now into 6 continents. And now I would like you to say hello to 2 people. This I think going to be a very interesting conversation. It's something I've had some vague conversations with when I've been out in Australia before. We're joined by Zena Cumpston, who is a Barkangji woman who works as a research fellow in urban environments at the University of Melbourne, and we're joined by Krystal de Napoli, who is a Gamilaroi woman and an astrophysicist studying Monash University, and they are both key science communicators in Indigenous science. So let's get started straight away. Thank you so much, by the way, for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us.
I will warn you, as in case you don't know, we have now, Steve and I have now been on stage for 19 hours. So there's a far more professional face that I may well have. If at any point you think this is even drivel by the standards we were warned about, I promise you it's merely tiredness that has created this level of insanity. Let's start off with, I mean, this is such an interesting area in terms of, let's start off with the astronomy, because like so much in terms of how we've grown up in a culture, we've grown up with such a small picture. You see that in everything. You see that in science, you see that in art, you see that in literature. It's been dominated by a small number of stories which we very often have been brought up to think is the whole picture. And I think in astronomy that's particularly, this is an area which people might not be thinking about at all. So can you give us a little bit of an idea of what people really don't understand or just don't know about what we would consider to be Indigenous astronomy?
Yeah, so Indigenous astronomy, I think it's an area that's been overlooked pretty largely on our continent, and I guess also worldwide, because there are a number of Indigenous cultures with really rich histories, and a lot of these cultures are ongoing continuous cultures. And so this brings in information that has been collected or passed down for tens of thousands of years. And so in Australia, we are home to the world's longest continuing culture, so about 60,000 to 100,000 years, and I know it always gets pushed back with further evidence. And so this, you can look at it, arguably, as one of the beginnings of astronomy, some of the world's earliest evidence of astronomical observation occurring. And what's amazing with it is that if we just listen, we actually get to learn quite a lot about the things that have happened on our continent over the last however many thousands of years. Supernova occurrences have been recorded, even things like volcanic eruptions and meteorite impacts. These are all things that are encoded in these oral traditions. And so I'm here promoting astronomy, but really just got to bounce the idea that all of this is really interconnected. A lot of these stories that talk about astronomy are also talking about things that are happening in the land and happening, with the animals and plants and everything. And so really what Zena and I do, it's really quite closely interlinked. Yes, there's a big history. We're very enthusiastic about it.
Can I ask you, Chris, for maybe one story in terms of something that people, again, who've been brought up with very specific kind of Western traditional ideas of what might really surprise them in terms of understanding that we can see within the oral tradition of Indigenous astronomy?
So there's 2 examples that jump to mind. I'm going to go with one that's it's like a really popular example, and this is how we can use features in the sky and the way that they change over the year to link them to changes that are happening in the environment. And so a really key story is that of the emu in the sky, because the emu, it is found in the Milky Way in our night sky, and in the southern hemisphere we get a really good look at it. So this emu shape, and no shade to other constellations, but I love it because it actually looks like an emu too. This is something that belongs to many different countries across this continent. And for some clarification for people who don't know much about Indigenous culture, at least from here in Australia, we have around 300 different countries, all with their own individual languages. And so when you think about Aboriginal Australia, you shouldn't be thinking about this one homogenized group of people, but more a very diverse continent. And so all of these different groups, they see this similar constellation of the emu, but they have their own different interpretations. But what I like talking about, it's a Gamilaroi tradition, is using the emu, the way it changes over the year, so looking at the orientation of that emu, using that to tell you a lot about what's happening to the emu on the ground. because it lines up really well with the emu breeding season. So at night you can go out, you can see where the emu is, and you will know when it's time to collect emu eggs, time that, you know, the emu is roosting over the nest. And also this is tying into changes in the environment. It tells you a lot about your water sources, the food sources, and also the cyclic nature of these seasons. And so it's one tradition relating to like one constellation in the sky that has all these layers of knowledge. And it also ties into ceremonial practice, and it will change for different groups. So it really highlights how you can take a story and just by using these comparisons, you can create a lot of hidden knowledge that is easy to understand, because we can just talk about the emu very casually with a child, about how the emu changes in the sky of the year, and we can know that the emu is running for a mate or it's roosting over the eggs. Or we can really pull that apart and get those heavier layers of detail. One other thing I'd like to mention was the second one, which is just also the careful eye for observation. So things like variable stars, which are stars which change in their brightness over periods of time. And these periods of time can be days or decades, in which you can see this star changing in its brightness. And this is something that has been recorded in many different oral traditions. And so it highlights that how essentially you don't need a pen and paper to be able to make careful observations, to keep track of that, and to encode it into a format or a story that's easy to understand and pass along. So I could go for hours, and I usually do, but there are two examples I like to highlight.
Well, we will have time for more examples as well. So now, Zena, can you tell us a little bit about your work in terms of Indigenous biodiversity?
Yeah, so I'm kind of new to the world of academia, but luckily in Australia at the moment, a lot of people are realising that we don't have enough Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people working in academia. So there's been lots of opportunities for many of us to kind of enter this system and start telling stories that are really important for us to have a more holistic understanding of science and many other areas. So I have come on to a group called the Clean Air Urban Landscapes Hub, and my focus for the work that I've been doing has been looking at biodiversity in urban areas. In Australia, in urban areas, it's very much thought that Aboriginal people don't exist, and we absolutely do. More Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people live in urban areas than in any other kind of context in Australia. So my job has kind of been looking at plants, especially in the city that I live. I live in Melbourne, and I live on Wurundjeri country. And I also work on Wurundjeri country. So I've looked at a lot of the plants that were once here, are still here, but that people don't think about their cultural context at all, and trying to find ways to communicate with a wide audience to think about the layers of knowledge which exist in Aboriginal communities today. Because I guess another thing that we're really fighting against, Krystal and I both, and all Aboriginal people who I think are working in academia, is the idea that Aboriginal people and knowledge are in the past, that all of us are in the desert, and that I guess in a way a lot of people think that our culture is dead, and it absolutely isn't. So my work has really been to bring alive those stories of plants and to really foster a sense that all of us have a place as custodians. Not all of us are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but all of us in this country need to understand that we are custodians of country. And we need to have that Aboriginal perspective if we're going to be sustainable and healthy and work to heal country, because there's so many terrible things happening with the environment at the moment. So one of the main things I did in this last year of my contract was release a booklet that was all about the plants that people will find right across Victoria. And I spoke about all the different ways that Aboriginal people have found incredible uses for these plants. So sometimes there's proteins that we've worked out we can get out of plants that sometimes take 8 or more processes, and yet people think that we don't practice science. Science is careful observation, and to live in the harshest country, in the world, and to be the oldest living culture, you don't just stumble across things by accident. It takes really careful, active management of country for us to still be here and to have survived so long. So yeah, I do a lot of storytelling and a lot of storytelling about plants, and I hope that it's making people connect more with plants and to realise their place, that even in urban areas we all have a responsibility to all living things, and Indigenous plants are a really important part of the puzzle in all of us making this a healthier place.
It seems, in terms of these ideas of connection, it seems, because I think there's the philosopher Slavoj Žižek still talks about the fact that so much in culture is it's pre-packed or it's flushed away without you seeing any of the process. So you don't know the process, how the food got to you. You don't know, the waste products just disappear from your eyes. And I think it's something, certainly in the UK, I think in some ways we've seen this during the lockdown, where people have started just to begin to get the first connections back to the sense of nature and seeing the process of watching flowers bloom and die, going on the same walk every single day. These things, I mean, it does seem like some of the thinking that you're mentioning is that bit which reminds us that everything is connected. Is that fair, Zena?
Oh, absolutely. And I think I feel for you all being locked down. We came out of quite a harsh lockdown only recently in Melbourne, and we've had much the same, reawakening happening in all of our communities because we could only go within a 5-kilometre radius. We couldn't see each other. People are really loving our parks to death at the moment, actually. People are really spending a lot of time in nature and starting to think about our connectedness. And I think over time, with all the things that have happened, with the way that knowledge has been gathered and processed over a long period of time, like I guess since the Enlightenment or something like that, we've come to see ourselves as separate to nature. But Krystal and I, and many Aboriginal people we don't have those siloed ideas about this is us and this is nature or this is science and this is history. I think the best thing about our culture and our way of learning is that it's extremely holistic. And so that abstraction from nature is a really big problem in all the environmental challenges that we're facing. We have to see ourselves as part of nature because fundamentally, although we have so many different nations across Australia, we have some overriding ideas. And one of the most important is that basically country is your mother. And if you look after her, she will look after you. And country is everything from the skies down to below the earth and everything in between. And it's living and non-living things as well. But it's this idea that you are a custodian, and if you look after your mother, she will look after you. And I think the more we can allow Aboriginal perspectives to come into the way in which we are managing country and conducting ourselves in science and any realm you can think of can only be a good thing, because we have so much to offer, and at the moment we're really only using half of the tools at our disposal. And you can really see that in the debates around cultural burning, especially at the moment in Australia.
That's very interesting. And Krystal, I'm interested as well in the way that you collate and collect, because collecting an oral tradition must be so different from that the way that research is done, and building up your knowledge. Can you give us some sense of the process of how you gather the knowledge and build it into this bigger picture?
That's a difficult question as well, because I haven't been on the forefront of working with community to actually collect oral traditions. So I know historically it's been a very less collaborative process, which is, I think, why a lot of universities are geared towards trying to mend that relationship before they can also before they can actually start working together properly as well. Because I guess it makes you a little bit apprehensive for community if, over the last 100, 200 years, people just sort of take a lot of information and run with it. I know that there's a lot of great things that are happening at the moment in terms of because there's sort of these gatekeeping when we try and approach or include Indigenous perspectives from some sort of Western institution like a university. You usually expect people to have some sort of degree to be able to take the information that they're saying seriously. And I feel like a lot of that like inherent bias has started to be addressed as well, to know that you can actually consult with community and that knowledge is completely valid without requiring some like PhD or something, because it's just not how Indigenous knowledge works or is passed along. But I know that there is at least stronger collaboration from now on where community drives and controls what research they want to happen with their knowledge. So I think things are getting better, but that's all I can comment on, because I haven't had to be in that position where I'm the one collecting the knowledge, if that makes sense.
And can I just ask you for, I think especially people who are watching this in the UK, this might be very much a new area for them. Where are the best places for them to go and begin to get some of this rich alternative picture to what they've previously presumed? Zena, where would you suggest in terms of biodiversity?
I think overall, for a really good idea about perhaps questioning some of the ways that we've perceived Aboriginal people and culture over time, the wider kind of worldwide picture, there's a great book called Dark Emu by an author called Bruce Pascoe. And that's a really magnificent starting point, I think, for people, because Uncle Bruce has used basically the journals of all of the explorers, and he has used their own words to really interrogate the idea that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were not actively managing country, and also that we didn't have agricultural practice. So he's used what the explorers and those people that first sort of came into Australia and had written records, he's used their perceptions and what they were writing about to really show that we absolutely were managing country and that we did have agricultural practice. And I think it's, for me, I found it a really exciting read, and I think it's very accessible in its language. It's not academic and kind of up itself. It's just very comprehensive, but done in a way that I think is really easy to understand. And if anyone's wanting to know particularly about biodiversity, there's also another elder who's a wonderful, I guess you'd call her an ethnobotanist, and her name's Auntie Frances Bodkin. And she's written some incredible papers and books, and she specifically talks a lot about how, so Krystal was talking before about things happening in the sky almost being a map for living and knowing what to do on country that's really sustainable. So what Krystal's talking about, so on my country, which is Barkindji country, not far from Krystal's country, when we see the emu's head go down, that's when we're allowed to collect the eggs. And that is the time that we're not affecting the proliferation of that animal, and we're also not taking the eggs at a time where it's started to become an emu. If we start taking them later, we're really upsetting the balance of everything. So that map for living kind of happens in the sky, but it also happens on the ground. So Auntie Frances Bodkin talks a lot about, in her Duddawal country, which is the south coast of New South Wales, all the signs that she sees in nature that tell her the certain times to do things. Sometimes when things are flowering, it'll tell you when the whales are passing by, which is almost incredible to kind of comprehend. But we have so much knowledge which has been built over such a long time of careful observation, the essence of science, and testing things, that these things, even though our climate is changing and things are moving a little bit to what they've been for a long time, they're still extremely valid. And it's a way of really connecting with the way that biodiversity is such a massive holistic picture. And yes, they're two authors that I think are really important and a really great accessible portal into understanding Aboriginal and people, from a lens that's, they're both Aboriginal people. And I think that's been a lot of the problem in the past. Our culture and societies have been judged by people who are outside them, who have a lens that doesn't work in terms of understanding the complexity of our knowledge. The idea that we were savages wandering around limping towards inevitable extinction before white fellas came here is it's actually completely against all of the science. And even those journal entries that I was talking about before, there are none which don't say that we were really strong, really strapping, healthy people. And that's because we knew how to manage country. It was only when smallpox came with the first fleet that we started to be otherwise.
I remember when Dark Emu came out, and it's one of those books that you can kind of judge by who's getting angry with it. This must be an interesting story that people want us to avoid. We're almost out of time. Krystal, I just wonder, is there anything you'd like to add again in terms of looking at the astronomy? Is there any other places we should also go?
Yeah, so we do have a website, actually, the Astronomy Research Group in Australia, and it is a collation of pretty much every resource that is to do with Indigenous astronomy here, and also some globally. So is it okay if I plug that, or is that...
Oh, yeah, of course it is. Yes, please do.
Yeah. Okay, so it's www.aboriginalaastronomy.com.au, and it is absolutely fantastic, and you can search information based on community or based on topic if you want to learn more about the sun and the star interpretations. But I would also like to just add, off Zena's points from before, you have to think very critically when you are engaging with resources about Aboriginal culture. A lot of them have so much misinformation, and over the last year, I've been working on this rather massive database as part of my work with the university to collate Indigenous science resources. And really what it's done is open my eyes to just how much misinformation is out there. And so I think the suggestion of looking for Indigenous authors is one of the best things you can do, and also contemporary writings. Because things like that, like Indigenous Australians can't count, or didn't have housing, or had no form of agriculture, like they are dangerous myths, but they are seen as truth really easily. And if you see some academic who has bought into them and fed that again, it's something you have to be very conscious of. So just be aware of what you're reading, think critically, and always seek out Indigenous voices.
Thank you both so much. Thank you, Zena and Krystal. I know a lot of people are going to be looking up more of that stuff now and going out and getting Dark Emu as well. So thank you very much, and I hope we will see you again for another event as well. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having us. It was fun. Thanks a lot.
That's great. Dark Emu is such a... I've known so many people have been recommending that. I really should get around to reading that now, because when I was out in Australia, I think when it came out, fascinating. Thanks very much for watching. Thank you to everyone who supports us via Patreon, because that's how we're able to make the number of shows that we are. And the more that we get, the better shows that we can make. So if you don't support us via Patreon already, it would be fantastic if you were able to. So thank you very much to everyone. Bye-bye.